Oh, good morning, everybody. Very relaxed session ahead of you. So how many of you could relate to the idea that there was a point in your life where maybe you had to reinvent yourself? Yeah. Or felt game over, I have no hope, I'm not sure what to do with my future. Not talking about why you joined Quantum Leap. Yeah, so I can totally relate to that. I've had to reinvent myself, my career, my life a number of times. And about 12 years ago, I had closed my family businesses. We had 3 retail stores in the area. I had buried my grandparents, who were really my parents. They're the ones who brought me up. And I was working part-time with Steve and Bill, but I had no idea what to do with my life. And it became a very dark time. And when Nanny passed away, my grandmother, I didn't get into a depression, but it was a deep funk. You know what that feels like? I would say deep melancholy. Yes. And so I decided, okay, we're not in the best place right now, a bit of a desert time. I think at age 48, it's time to have a midlife crisis. Now seems to be the perfect time, because I'm type A, so why not plan it out? And right. So I knew I had choices, right? I could get a red Mustang with a convertible and go on Route 95 and leave those 20-somethings in my dust. Or I can get this beautiful trophy girlfriend and say, look, I'm fine. Or I can go, right, Or I get a backpack and sell everything and just go spread good cheer throughout the world. Instead, what I did is I bought a farm. Now, I did that because in my early days, my grandparents who brought me up, we had a store in Lancaster County, New Holland, Pennsylvania, about an hour from here. And if you know Pennsylvania, it's a beautiful, rich agricultural state. Beautiful rolling hills. And as a kid, earliest days, I came from a broken upbringing, but Granddad and Nanny, they had the store, and we dealt with the Amish and Mennonites, and driving back and forth to New Holland from Philadelphia every day, and got to bag candy, and I met these wonderful farmers, and riding on Route 23, seeing rolling hills on either side, looking out the window. And it was special. So I guess maybe looking back in 2004 at age 48, the midlife crisis was, I'll get a farm. It was a 30-acre horse farm, Gina, wherever you are. And here's the thing. So to be a farmer, you've got to have every skill in the world. If you give me a hammer, I'm like, which end do I use? And you do it. So I'm not handy. I'm like, never rode a horse before, and I'm like, that's scary looking. And it was like a Civil War era, like farm building that needed a lot of work, and I'm like, what? And I remember my best friend at the time, before I drove up to look at the place, knowing me, he said, with a twinkle in his eye, he said, please don't do something impetuous. And I'm like, okay. And I got there and I bought this farm, and I had to work 2 or 3 jobs to pay for it, had it for 4 years. But when I bought that farm, there must have been something. Ever have to trust your gut when things are not good? Something I just knew I had to get this crazy thing. I had to buy a 54-inch riding mower and other lawn mowers and weed whackers and fixing fences, and I got lots of help. And I remember first getting on my tractor, and somebody took a picture, and I showed the picture, and they're like, you are so not a tractor person. And I just said, yeehaw, So yes, I am, because I have a farm. And I remember going up there on weekends, still living in the Philadelphia area, back and forth, back and forth. And what I didn't realize I would have to do with 30 acres is constantly mow it and maintain it, because remember, I'm type A. It's got to look neat. In my own internal chaos, at least exterior, it should be fine. So I'm mowing 5 hours every time I went up there. But it was cool. And I remember about a year into having this crazy adventure. And I'm sure you could relate too, when you're outwardly totally functional and everything's fine, right? And inside, you're just like, yeah. So that was a couple years of that for me. So when we talk about reinventing yourselves, I gotcha. About a year in, it was a beautiful July afternoon. I had just completed about 4 hours of the mowing, and I got off the big mower, and now is my little mower near the farmhouse, and right beyond the farmhouse are 2 little ponds, and there's woods. And I'm stripped to the waist, opposite of how I'm looking now. This is how I should look. And sweating and dirty, and the sun is beating on me, 85 degrees, and I've been mowing and pushing and using my body, and I'm out in my farm. And I was facing the farmhouse, and the sun was right here, and I just was looking up at the sun for a second, just feeling it on my face. And I heard a flap. And like out of the sun, this huge blue and gray bird flew as if out of the sun. It was a blue heron, those gigantic birds, and it just skidded onto the surface of the pond right in front of me. It was just, shh. And I looked at it, and I turned off the mower and just stood there, and the sweat is dripping off and the filth, but the sun is beating on me, and I'm looking at this bird, and this bird is glancing at me but going about its own business. And in that moment, this black cloud, 2 years in, just went, never to return. And when I think about what are the different things we all have that are points of reinventing our life, that may have been the God one, the trusting my inner gut one, and that was, I was thinking I wasn't going to share that story, but I went out in the parking lot and the sun was beating on my face half an hour ago. I'm like, I should tell them that story. So we all need to reinvent ourselves. And I would, knowing most of you, and regarding myself too, I think we would, at some level, we're all healers of some kind, don't you think? Trying to heal something that's broken. And anyway, that's what I realized the farm did for me. Something was broken. And I had people come to the farm, and I realized, wow, storytelling heals too. So what we're going to do is spend till 11 o'clock, I get you till then, and we're going to do a combination. I'm going to share how I discovered the power of real-life storytelling. It's real-life storytelling. It's not, in this case, myths, legends, children's stories. It's about our stories, our customer stories, other famous people stories. Share a little bit of how I came to discover the power of that, get us telling little stories in small groups. It's going to be more workshop-y than me speaking the whole time. I'll spend maybe 20 minutes going into the left brain and teach you stuff about the science of storytelling, so you'll be happy with that. And then we'll finish, the last half hour, we'll actually work on a story about somebody we've helped, how to tell that story, working together on that. And if there's time, maybe I'll coach a couple of you on that. Does that sound good? Great, so off we go. So the power of real-life storytelling, that's me. And I do this outside of Quantum Leap. I do this for companies and organizations now nationwide directly because of what I've learned by being a Quantum Leap coach. So that's pretty cool as the ongoing reinvention. So why would this could be interactive? So I think Steve might have the mic. Why we've heard a lot about storytelling so far in this meeting. Why do we need to use the power of real-life stories when we communicate? Any thoughts? Steve, you just get a shout it out even. Or, okay. Oh. Whoa.
It draws people into what you're doing.
Draws people into what you're doing, yeah.
Hello.
Makes you emotionally connected, yep. Makes you relatable.
It's the only thing people will pay attention to in this scattered existence we have.
Yeah, scattered existence we have. The only thing people will pay attention to, yeah.
It gets you out of your head and into your heart.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, especially when it's like multi-sensory.
Yep, I agree completely. Right.
We live experiences. It's not that we think, we live the experiences. It's
Great.
the imagery.
Yep, exactly.
Being a university professor for 20 years, I've never had a student come up and say, I've never forgotten that lecture you did on. But I have people all the time who come up 20 years after a workshop, 20 years after class, and say, I never forgot the story you told about.
Excellent, yeah, amen. John?
It motivates people.
Motivates people, yeah, we'll talk about that, exactly right. I should take notes from my upcoming book.
What happened to the farm?
Aha. I sold it right before the 2008 crash, thankfully. I just had a feeling, and I was cultivating this wealthy couple, and I had them, this was cool marketing, by the way, total tangent. But I had a sense that, I'm working 2 or 3 jobs, I see the economy, and this nice wealthy couple had been looking for a farm, and I let them stay overnight for free. Like a year before I needed to sell it. And when I realized I needed to sell it, I called them up and I caught them right in the nick of time. So I got out from under it. But my dream, just as we share our dreams, I really want to do story retreats and get a farm someday in this area and have people come to the farm, live there, have dogs, get the red Mustang and the trophy girlfriend. That's the dream. You can help me do it. Thank you for asking, Marco. So yeah, I agree with everything we talked about, and I would add a few. So we no longer, in my opinion, live in the information age. We live in the information overwhelm age. Yes? How many of you are overwhelmed with emails and so much, what's going to cut through that? What we've said, storytelling. If we're living in the information overwhelm age, I would posit we don't know who to trust anymore. How do we decide with all that stuff coming at us? What are we going to sort through here? And again, we're all entrepreneurs here. We need competitive advantages. Therefore, we feel disconnected. I think the great irony of social media is it's not necessarily connecting us in real ways. Oh, I have thousands of followers. How much do you know about each other? I don't know. I think we said yesterday, your best marketing tool is you and you and you and you. Having coffee with somebody. So you're your best marketing tool, and how are you going to be known but through stories? And because of all this, we need a counterbalance to data dump and technology burnout. Does that make sense? What's going to be the counterbalance? This is really art and science of storytelling we'll be talking about today. Feel free anytime to ask a question and talk about stuff with me in a discussion format. So it's about making sure the human element is at the heart of your communications. Now, nothing I say today, you're going to hear me talk about left brain, right brain in broad strokes. I'm not dismissing the importance of information and advice and data and statistics, but I'm not talking about that today. Looking for the counterbalance. So yes, you need to give information. Yes, your professional work counts and your degrees and all your achievements. Storytelling, I would say, though, is an equal counterbalance. Make sense? Good. So how I discovered that using real-life stories is the best way to connect with, relate to, influence, and inspire others. You've heard me talk about my grandparents. That's where they are. At my brother's wedding, Nanny and Granddad. How many of you had somebody in your life, maybe growing up, who did tell a lot of stories? Typically, yeah. So that was Nanny. I mean, she just had this wonderful self-deprecating sense of humor. These goofy things would happen to her. And she just always had this ability to laugh at herself. Like, I take myself way too seriously. And she would do things, lived in a little semi-detached home about half an hour from here, and she decides that there's a wolf in her backyard. This is outside city limit. There's no wolves. But she calls the Lower Merion Police Department as, officer, there's a wolf in my backyard, because it's dark out, and she's like, oh. And the policeman comes, and the sirens are going, and he goes over, and he's like, lady, it's a cat. You know, and we would hear those stories. She stole a car from the Acme parking lot. The key happened to fit, and she drives home, and she's like, oh, where's my dry cleaning, and where's my grocery? Isn't that terrible? You can't trust anything anymore. And then she looked again, and it wasn't even the right color. And she went, oh, and she drove it back, and she put the car back. And we're assuming that in between that time period, the Lower Merion police had to come back. The lady who complained, she's like, here's your car, what's the problem? And we would ask to hear those stories again and again. Right, Rick? The stories that are told and told and told. So she really set this up, I guess. And as I told you, there was a time in my life where I had to reinvent. Well, that's because tough upbringing, emotionally abusive mother, never met my dad. And he died when I was too young to meet him. In my 20s, just wasn't aware of it. But Nanny and Granddad, they were awesome. They rescued my family, rescued me. And so I was groomed. Nanny loved theater, and they both went to the Metropolitan Opera. So I was brought up in a business environment and an arts environment. So that was sort of both going on there. Maybe still it does, both business and the arts, the power of both. So I remember going as a teenager to the Met, and we'd have wonderful meals. And even when Granddad took me on buying trips to New York in the morning, we'd do that, but then we'd have a great meal and go to a museum. So it was this merge. And I went to George Washington University, still very shy, withdrawn. At heart, I'm more introvert than extrovert. And decided to pick an amazingly effective practical major. I was an art history major. Wow. Super helpful. I use it to this day. No, I don't. And somehow made it through college, got out of there, and came back to Philadelphia and joined the Savoy Company, which is a Gilbert and Sullivan opera company, and started getting my life put together piece at a time. But I was really groomed to run the family businesses, the store in New Holland and a couple fabric stores locally, just not far from here. The fabric stores just didn't resonate with, and but did it for a while. But it came time, everything has its cycle. In our businesses, in our lives, came time to close those stores. So now I'm in my late 30s, and I had to close those stores a piece at a time. And as I closed, we had 4 stores total as I got out of college, and didn't love them, but I was doing it, brought in income, was supporting the greater family. And as I closed each one, I almost felt like things were starting to close in, because I'm an art history major. What am I going to do? And it came to a point where I did close all those stores and brought to the point where I talked to you about my farm. Well, one day there's a little town near here, an older suburb that was struggling economically called Lansdowne. Anybody locally know Lansdowne, PA? It's 20 minutes from here. And I remember driving on Lansdowne Avenue on the way to this just before the last store closed in Sharon Hill. And rainy day, you know, and I'm stopped at Baltimore Pike and Lansdowne Avenue, a busy intersection, and definitely my mood was matching the rainy day. And I happened to glance, whether God-given vision or something just internal, but I glanced at an abandoned bank building from the 1920s, and I looked again, and I thought, you know, the arts are a huge economic driver in any major city. What if I started a performing arts center right there and put together the artistic and business side, and maybe I can do something? Well, Celebration Theater was launched out of that in 1999. And stepping out of our comfort zone, so when we're all working together, because your coaches are colleagues of yours, you know, we've been there too, we continue to be there, doing uncomfortable things, launching a theater, what the heck? You know, and so I called up the volunteer mayor of the town, and I said, can I come over? I said, I think, why don't we start a theater? And she literally jumped on her dining room table and like, yes. Then I went to Borough Council, and they said, sure. And we ended up going for a building just down the street from the abandoned bank building. This is the 20th Century Club. And I founded and gathered the whole town around it, did all sorts of cool stuff, and ran it for 4 years. Sold my house to fund it, made no money, but it was living a dream and a passion, and that began stuff turning around. And, but realized the business side of me said, it's not really just about let's do a show. It was about building community and selling tickets to support it. So every show we did something outside the box that got publicity, and that drove ticket sales, and I sold out most of my performances in over 4 years, which was cool. Yeah, so that started it going. Now that led to, you know, Philadelphia is really the epicenter of the American Revolution. The country started in Boston and got created here. And so the National Park Service, you go downtown, the old city to this day, wonderful job delivering information and data and statistics and all the good stuff about those early days, about American history. And unfortunately, American history is regarded as dry and boring. It's actually not. But it's regarded as so because in some cases, teachers just have been stuck in the, let me just deliver the information, right? Well, Historic Philadelphia, Inc. was started by Ed Rendell, mayor at the time in the 90s, to be like the entertainment nonprofit arm of the National Park Service. And in 2004, they were tasked with starting a new project called Once Upon a Nation. And they got a professional historian and PR people and conceiving what is this thing, and the heart of it is going to be a storytelling project. And I guess because of my work in Celebration Theater, really getting a whole community behind this thing, I got to be their first artistic director and storytelling director. Now, this was a total fake it till you make it situation. I know, sure, storytelling. You're like, nanny, wolves in backyards, is that what you want? But I got the job, and we were starting to figure it out, right? And came up with some early story scripts, which is what I help you with. And I was, okay, story, let's figure. This was way before storytelling became this national conversation. So, Historic Philadelphia, HPI, what a great organization. Let's come up with this idea, and let's do a soft start. Let's just show it to a couple people, right? No, let's roll it out at the Free Quaker Meeting House. This is across from the National Constitution Center, downtown. The Free Quakers, who knows who they were? The Quakers were pacifists. The Free Quakers, they were fighters. They were not pacifists. They like England, get out. So they would have arms. So their meeting house was here, the Free Quaker Meeting House, which Historic Philadelphia runs. So, okay, we'll try it here. Well, what we'll actually do is do it via a press conference. So remember, I'm sort of the guy tasked with bringing this whole thing to life, directing the storytellers, figuring it out, and you know quietly I'm trying to reinvent my career. That's the sub-drama. So not only do they do it at a press conference, but they invite that now Governor Ed Rendell. He's the prime funder of the whole thing. And he's the governor of one of those most populous, wealthy states in the country. And he, at that time, was even thinking of running for president. Nice guy, charismatic. So, oh, good. The first story is going to be in front of all these. So happy. So it's about a month before we open. And, you know, we're training storytellers. And so we trained Jill Jill Lawrence, on one of our first stories. So imagine, here's the interior of the Free Quaker Meeting House. Just a small place, those are pews. You're looking at the back wall, and the pews are facing the front. So the dignitaries walk in. First, the TV crew comes in. They set up in the corner. And we're waiting for Rendell, who is never on time, just to let you know. Maybe that's for all politicians. So, when I get nervous, my lip, sort of breaks out in a sweat. I'm doing like this. I'm pacing, and people want to talk to me. I'm like, yeah. So we're in the back. Everybody's there. We're waiting for Rendell. Finally, there's a commotion out on Arch Street. 2 big black SUVs pull up. Secret Service come out. They come in first, like, where are these Free Quakers? Everything's okay. They sit down. Rendell walks in, shaking hands. He sits down. And Jill goes forward to tell her story. And I'm in the back watching and watching, because if he doesn't like it, not only is the project probably going to not happen, but I'm going to be an art history major again. So she tells the story of Lydia Dara. Do you know that Philadelphia was the capital city during the Revolution and slightly beyond? If the capital city during a war is occupied by the enemy army, war is over. The British took over Philadelphia. Washington ended up in Valley Forge waiting. But the war should have been over. The British came in here, took over Philadelphia, parties, dress balls, having a great. The loyalists in the colonies were like, this is great, we're fine now. And Jill's starting to unfold the story of how a number of British officers commandeered, you know what commandeered means? You took over somebody's house, of Lydia Dara. She's an old Quaker woman, and the British officers are here. She's staying in her bedroom for weeks and weeks and weeks. One night, she hears a bunch of officers come in. She's upstairs, and clearly they're having a meeting. Locks the door where the meeting room is. She wonders if something is up. So she creeps downstairs. It's an old lady, and she's listening to the keyhole. If anybody opened that door, she may have lost her life in that moment. She hears them say they're planning a surprise attack on the Continental Army and George Washington in White Marsh, Pennsylvania, about 20 miles outside the city. She's like, oh my God, this could be it. And she was a patriot, not a loyalist. So what am I going to do? So she goes back upstairs, pretends to be sleeping, and her mind is racing. She wakes up the next morning. She gets an empty sack for flour and gets a pass to go through this enemy sentry lines and starts walking. She's in her late 70s. She's walking this dusty, lonely road. She makes it past the sentries and keeps walking on the dusty road to White Marsh. And Jill is unfolding the story. And during all this, I'm watching, everybody's paying attention, except Rendell. He's busy, he's the governor, like whatever. He's on his BlackBerry, and he's listening to his aides, and he's paying attention, and he's on his BlackBerry, and he's listening to his aides, and he's paying, And I'm in the back going, but she's unfolding the story. And she gets to the heart of the story. And Lydia just pauses on that road, and she's made it past the enemy line. She has this information that nobody has. And the whole war is pivoting on this moment. Will she make it? And she just stops on that road and prays that she will make it. And in that silence was my big aha. Because what Rendell did is he went from this to this to that. And for the rest of the story, he was like on it. And when I saw him put down his technology and stop whispering to the aides and no longer distracted and not being bombarded with information, but getting into the emotional drama of a story, a real story, and I saw this powerful man go to the technology, I'm in the back going, no more art history. And, and also, wow, what just happened here? Right? Isn't that cool? And so we did launch Once Upon a Nation. That's an example. It's still going to this day. These are storytelling benches. We have a whole crew of trained storytellers, people from out of college, history majors, theater majors, and I got to train them for 7 years, hundreds of them. And you can come anytime from Memorial Day through Labor Day. We have about 13 benches, 13 colonies, and you go around outside major spots, Betsy Ross House, Christ Church, Independence Hall, National Constitution Center, and they'll tell you a story. And they're carefully scripted, but delivered as if they were just coming out of their mouths. Interactive, fun, serious, through 4 centuries of Philadelphia history. We went on to win a national award for redelivering American history. Never been done the way we were doing it. At this year, it's entering its 11th year. Over 2 million people have heard those stories. And, you know, I was blessed with having directed it, but seeing thousands of reactions to stories, properly told or not, and how to fix them. So that's a bit of my career story. That led me to doing work outside of historic Philadelphia, all along working with Steve and Bill part-time. Got invited to work with the Kennedy Space Center. This is my way of thinking I'm clever. Storytelling brings NASA down to earth. Ha-ha. And that's me with a colleague in front of the Discovery as it was on the way to its museum. So it was as the shuttle program was closing, I got to be on the runway as it was waiting for its final move. And then came the next big aha. So one of the things we recommend in Quantum Leap is join things, be members of organizations. So I belong to Wayne Presbyterian Church, 2,200 members. I had recently joined. You heard yesterday how I do my expert status claim as like I'm one of the foremost storytellers, and they invited me to do a first workshop. This was about 4 years ago at Wayne Press, and did a storytelling workshop for adults. And who does free, you know, if you do free speaking is one of the things we teach, right? This was a free workshop to serve my own worship community. Well, who takes free stuff? People who run things. So the head of the local Audubon Society, Audubon lived here for a while, it's a bird conservation group. They were planning to go out to the national convention in Skamania Lodge in the state of Washington. This guy said, Jeffrey, storytelling is everything. He could help us raise money. How about we get you and a film crew to go out and film people's stories? I'm like, yeah, because I don't want to be an art history major. So I did so. So that's where we were, Skamania Lodge at Columbia River Gorge. There's the film crew. That's me circled. And it was really something because we had time for 59 chapter presidents. We wanted to capture stories every 15 minutes. This was, again, something new for me is like, well, can we do that? In a very artificial environment. Makeup crew, sound booms, lighting. These are intellectuals who don't speak for a living necessarily. And how can we do that? So we had to come up with some key trigger questions. You might want to write these down. So I asked them to warm them up. So imagine you're coming in, you're sitting on a stool like this, you're getting makeup on, I'm hovering behind the camera, and we're trying to capture your stories quickly. So getting other people to tell you their stories is just as important as you telling your stories. Obvious, right? If we're building relationships, connecting and communicating, you have stories. As the customer, you might want to tell, you as an expert. First question, who introduced you to this? In this case, who introduced you to birds or conservation? Who? So stories, again, are not an information delivering thing. It's a relationship building thing. It's about people in times and places, right? So who introduced you to this? And they started answering, oh, my mom would always set up a bird feeder in our backyard, and every year a cardinal would come, and we think it was the same pair. And we got to know these cardinals, and that really set the stage for me as an adult to love birds and conservation. Second question, can you describe a scene, this is really important, where you became impassioned about this? So some key words there, impassioned. If you're not into what you do, get another job, right? If you're not into it, because I believe your own enthusiasm for what you do is 75% of the sale right there. But can you describe a scene? We'll talk more about that in a little while. And finally, this was the big one. So they're warming up. They're starting to tell us stories about the backyards and all these things. And but this was the one that when I asked it, they just took it to a new level. Because we all have our causes, and these folks want to save the world through conservation. And the beauty of what birds do incredible things. They migrate tens of thousands of miles using the electromagnetic field, etc. So I was behind the camera, and some who were a little more reticent, I looked them in the eye and I said, okay, why does it matter? And I gave them a little bit of an attitude. So why does it matter? I'll tell you why it matters. First of all, and they're, whoa, this whoa. 59 people later, after 3 days, I came away, bought my first hummingbird feeder, and I'm feeding the birds, and I rent an apartment, so the apartment complex is stop feeding the birds, it's poop everywhere. I'm like, whatever, I'm not an art history major, I can do it. So that was really cool to see why does it matter. So those are some great trigger questions. So let's spend a little time talking about 12 principles of great storytelling. There may be more. I'll move quickly through it because I want to get us into working on a story. So well done, everybody. One is stories can be used so that others realize why you care and why something matters. And feel free, I know what Ajit is, if you want to take photos of the slides, that's perfectly fine. So again, I'm coming at this from, we all feel in Quantum Leap that marketing at its best is very personal and relational, and that really can take the teeth out of it for you. Oh, I don't want to ever be viewed as a marketer. Not if you're doing it out of, Steve says marketing is love, a kind of love. Storytelling is the vehicle of delivery for that. So if you like what you do, let your face show it and share it. And the way to share it is like, it's one thing to say, I really care about that. Like, really? Prove it to me. But if you just tell a story, we're going to get it. So stories teach things very naturally. Otherwise, you're telling me what to do. Don't tell me what to do. I'm an adult, right? But you're naturally doing it. A little bit on the science of storytelling. Look it up mostly, but found this cool slide. How storytelling, it does affect the brain. Neural coupling. So this is me being very left brain for the moment. Feel free to take a quick nap. But for those of you that like this, a story activates parts in the brain that allows the listener to turn the story into their own ideas and experiences thanks to a process called neural coupling. What we're talking about, how many of you were sharing with each other and you felt like, oh, I so relate to that. In fact, you started jumping into the story somehow. You found the other thing on the wall or something crazy thing. Do I see nodding on that? You found yourself jumping. That's not accidental. Storytelling is not at all woo-woo or artsy-fartsy or anything. It is deep science. I would say it's primal science. It goes back to our earliest beginnings. How long have there been Homo sapiens, more or less? 500,000 years, whatever. This is what we've done since the beginning. Anything you're holding that has a battery in it is obsolete like tomorrow. We're not wired for technology. We're wired for primal technology, which is storytelling. Mirroring, listeners will not only experience the similar brain activity to each other, but also to the speaker. It's like we jump into each other's stories. I like to say the stories are a door to open more relationships and communication. Stories are a bridge between us. And I also like to think that storytelling brings us back around the campfire, back around the dinner table. In a society, in a time when we are overwhelmed and we're just, this is a warm, warm skill. Triggers dopamine, cortex activity, all good stuff. So a lot of people say in a speech or when I'm at a networking event or when I'm at a business meeting, should I lead with, I was taught in the 20th century especially, I got to give them the data. That's what they want. My VP, my CFO is like, give me the data or else I'm going to be unhappy. So what should I lead with? Should I lead with facts, data, and logic, which is the rational brain? Or should you lead a conversation or a speech with, you know what I'm going to say, imagination, stories, intuition, and emotions, the relational brain. That's the right brain. And how you can clean up your presentations really fast. Give you a secret. If you have written down case studies or stuff, and you've decided well-meaningly to merge statistics and story, so there's data, then a story, then it goes away, don't. This is my suggestion. Stories are here. They will always be more powerful than data, always. A master speaker can mix it up. Most of us shouldn't. I don't, because what it does, I call them mental speed bumps. If you get me into a story and then start commenting on the story, you've taken me into the left brain about how things are made. That's over here. Stories are over here. Question? Facts tell, stories sell. There's a study that in a typical meeting, people remember, if it's facts, somewhere about 37% of the facts, but if they hear a story, 66% of them remember the story. This is not accidental. Dan. Yeah, thank you, by the way, just anytime you want to ask something or start a discussion.
So I had two thoughts. I heard when you hear a story and somebody tells you about a bridge, that you're actually constructing the bridge in your mind. Even if you're not a bridge maker, you're making whatever a bridge is to you, the trusses, the boards, the railings, you're actually constructing it in your head while they're telling the story.
Exactly right.
And I not sure if I should say this out loud, but I want to. And I had a thought that we all know a picture's worth 1,000 words. I would say a story is worth 1,000 pictures.
I love that. Yeah, love that. Did you notice my opening story? It was all about how many can relate to having to reinvent yourself in deserts, and that kept popping up. Yeah, because I knew we are all entrepreneurs and we all lived it. So that was deliberate, but the story was real. So what I suggest is you go relational first when you're trying to talk to somebody. I've worked with IT leaders who are wondering why people aren't saying yes to their wonderful IT solutions. And after the storytelling workshop, they went, oh, I keep trying to pitch them my ideas without relating to them first. Peter.
The amazing thing about the bridge analogy is everybody in the room is constructing a different bridge, constructing the bridge that means something to them. And so that's where this imagery, building the imagery, is so personal, even in a room full of 10,000 people.
Yeah. Could you imagine the power, this bridge building? You know, I live with my grandparents' furniture that they commissioned from a well-known artist, one-of-a-kind furniture. And I have people coming into my apartment and never ask me a thing about it. And it's beautiful, one-of-a-kind furniture by Wharton Esherick, famous woodworker of the 20th century. But if they even asked me about it, they would hear about my grandparents, and we would have this walk in blindly. Imagine if you walk into anybody's office who you want to build a relationship, and you actually look what's on their shelves or their pictures and ask them the stories behind things. They're already interested in your solutions. So what if you ask them about their stories? What if you did? And you have your own stories to tell, this back and forth bridge. So number 3, craft the story so that the audience sees themselves in it. That's what we're talking about. That's the neuroscience. That's where I told one of my farm stories, because I figured you would see yourself in it because I know the pain of having to reinvent myself. That's a big one. I like all these, but this is one of my favorite, number 3. So that helps you avoid, I'm just going to stand up here and take an hour to tell you my whole life story. And unless it's a book reading about your memoir, but even then you have life stories to teach. So try to always think about who am I sharing, where might they see themselves in it, and you know what? It's not rocket science. We all, if we're real people, which we are, we've all struggled with only so many problems. Self-worth, isolation, like being in a desert. If you're grounding your stories on what I call the basic human dilemmas, you're not going to go too far wrong. Because when we're real with each other, you know, at some level we're naked. And it's okay. It's really cool. Number 4, start the story, if you can, with an attention-grabbing hook, just like you're pitching the media. And it could be, you know, there was a time in my life where game over. I more or less said that, and you're all like, yep, got it. That was me too. You could do that in one sentence. Start like you would with pitching the media when you're doing a speech or something. Think of a question or a statement where it sounds like a hook. It's like, really? Tell me more. Number 5, keep the story path easy to follow. No detours, no tangents. Or if you do go off from within the story, know you need to grab them back. So if you're immersing us around the primal campfire, which you are doing scientifically, the last thing you want to do is after you started weaving a story and we're all in it together is all of a sudden start commenting on the story or go off somewhere else and go, you know, that makes me think of, that's a tangent. You've yanked me out of the story. All these are so fixable. It should be obvious. Everything I'm saying should be obvious because you're wired for story, right? So no detours, no tangents. This is a simple chart of how a story could go. Now, I draw a distinction between an anecdote and a story. What's an anecdote? Because many people say, I've got a story to tell you, and then they tell me an anecdote. I'm like, Anecdote is story light. This crazy thing happened to me the other day, and they think that's a story. It sort of is, but it's story light. It's not a story of transformation, of depth. So a story can really be, it starts over here, right? Background, a little bit of background, depends what the story is. Just set the stage. And where the V starts to go down is what Hollywood would call the inciting incident. It's basically in The Wizard of Oz, the tornado shows up in the background. Something's brewing that propels the central character of the story slowly but surely into a dark place, a beast at a time. And the circle at the bottom, draw this out, the big scene. And we could work on this. Those of you who have worked with your stories, you know I'm always looking for the big scene. What's the turnaround? Where does the light bulb go off to you if it's your story? Where's the epiphany? Where's the aha? Well, guess what? If a light bulb goes off, when is it most powerful? It's when it goes off in the darkness. So when you go to the darkest moment of the story, which if it's your stories will be painful to tell, but that's the most magical point, because everybody in the audience, I will guarantee this to you, nobody will think any less of you. In fact, your credibility will go through the roof when we stop pretending that we have all the answers. So you develop a big scene, and slowly but surely you hopefully climb out of that dark spot, and our lives could be full of these V's, and then you're going on, but hopefully wiser. Somebody among our group had a great idea for me, is that if I recreate this, that right-hand horizontal will be a little higher, because now you know stuff. Now, I think there's a second invisible V underneath this one. So this is what happened, right? As you're crafting a story, the invisible V underneath it is what was your emotional journey. Everything's fine until it wasn't. And how'd you feel? And if you're talking spiritually, at my workshop lately at church, they said, I think there's a third V. I'm like, I had to make a new slide. But where's God in that? And I think it's a straight line of steadfastness, but cool. Okay. No story is a good story without something for the hero to push against, an antagonist. Now, it could be a person. It could be the wicked witch. It could be the difficult parent. It could be losing your job. It could be a problem, a situation, something that opposes the central character, that creates the dramatic tension. Number 7, keep the story spell unbroken. We've talked about this, but you see I'm emphasizing it by avoiding left brain information. So if you're doing a speech, start with the story. If you actually think about it, I'm giving you a bunch of left brain stuff now, a good hour into the presentation, because I know I have 2 hours. But we started with a story, and then we're working together on stories, and then I'm giving you left brain information. If I keep doing it, you're going to start wanting your coffee. So left brain is important, but don't break up the story, please. Number 8, build in reveals so that the listener stays engaged. That's my fancy word for suspense. What happened next? What happened next? What happened next? And remember, you have everyday stories to tell. Don't have to be big deal stories. You have lots of stories you could tell. So build in natural reveals so people are like, what's going to happen next to this person? Number 9, focus the story on light bulb moment scenes, which I've talked about. The darkest hour leading to the epiphany. The epiphany could just be a change of course, something you realized. What's the little thing that gets you moving? Focus the story on light bulb moment scenes. Number 10, engage our primal imagination. So here's the thing. We're all married to our phones, and I know I'm going on my rant, but I'm on the stage, so I get to. Technology is a tool. It's all it is, and we have become addicted to it. As a society, you have the most powerful tool ever, which is if you can do triggering our imagination. What's the root word of imagination? Image. How are you going to do that? Detailed visual description. The blue heron with blue and gray wings flew out of the sun and the heat on my, Detailed, that's why we did that exercise. Detailed visual description. So as you're telling a story, you can move quickly at times, but when you get to the big scene, slow it down so we see the rattlesnake on the path and hear the rattle and the person lying down. Why that is at the bottom, the basic thing is we're creatures too. We're part of the natural world. It's not so good that we all live in cities anymore because we're removing ourselves from it. Storytelling is of an equal power to the natural world, to emotions, to all this rich stuff that we are deciding to put barriers in. So you're going to break down the barriers by telling your stories. Detailed visual description. Number 11, make sure the central character in the story goes through a journey of transformation. That addresses what I just talked about. An anecdote is not a story of depth. An anecdote will not move people to a change. You're all change agents. You're all healers. You've been there first in most cases. We need to hear that you've been transformed one way or another, or you've offered transformations to others, or both. Number 12, deliver the story with enthusiasm and authenticity. It should be obvious, but sometimes, just bring it, And it really, what it is if it's your story, it's a reliving. You're going to go back there. When I think about what stories I'm going to tell, never happens on stage, nor should it necessarily. But like I was in the parking lot, just wanted to be outside for 5 minutes after 3 days, thinking about, oh, I want to tell my farm story, and I teared up. Like that was a dark time for me. And oh, I'm a healer through storytelling, and my friends and colleagues here are too. And I had some emotions. Didn't have it up here, but I did there. It's a reliving, and it grounds us in our authenticity. Authenticity, I think, is your number one asset. Again, otherwise I'll buy it online. I don't know. Why not? So, you all know about Brene Brown, maybe, TED Talks, 12 million, whatever, how many views she's had. Social scientist, she says, if I couldn't measure it, it didn't exist. And then she realized that vulnerability is the key to, I think, the 21st century. So you can go vulnerable. You have permission if you need it. Yeah. So, by using real-life stories, you can move hearts and minds in powerful ways. Thank you for your time. You like my new picture? Now go develop your stories. So let's see. Thank you. Very quickly, and then we're going to get into our exercise. Got half an hour left. Thank you.